Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine war news update, second part thereof for the 5th of December 2024. This is a military aid and assistance video. We're going to start with the US. Another declaration that they are planning to transfer the entire $61 billion in aid that the last appropriations package assigned to Ukraine by the end of Biden's term. Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, assured NATO and the Ukrainian side of the readiness to fully use the funding for Ukraine authorized by Congress. So there were some rumors recently that they are going to be unable to spend it all on time due to it being only 6 weeks of, what is it? Probably about 6 weeks, maybe a little bit more for them to spend all of that money. He stressed that he was satisfied with how the costs of aid to Ukraine are distributed between the US and other NATO partners. Quote, and this is super, super important. So I really appreciate Antony Blinken saying this, and I think this needs to be front page news. This needs to be on Fox News big time. Quote, allies are increasing their support. In total, the US has provided Ukraine with $102 billion in aid, and our partners have provided $158 billion. So this whole idea that the US has spent all of this money, over 200 billion, and much more than Europe has spent. Antony Blinken himself is saying, US has spent 102 billion. Everyone else, our partners, have spent 158 billion. To continue his quote, this is the best example of financial burden sharing that I have seen in my 30-year career. So why this is important, because he's saying that many critics from inside the US are not just a little bit wrong, they are 100% wrong. They have flipped the narrative. It's not that actually Europe needs to pay more and the US is doing all of this. It's like the US is doing a right amount and the rest of the world are doing the right amount type thing. They're like, this is not just, it's not a criticism of Europe. Is actually celebrating that this is the best financial burden sharing I've seen in my 30-year career. It's not that it's bad, it's that it's good. And I think that needs to be understood by more people around the world, but particularly in the US. Okay, then we hear this. And if you want to get a sense of what the Trump administration is like, the incoming administration, where their loyalties lie, where their sympathies lie, where their empathy lies, it's not with Ukraine. So the House Speaker has rejected Biden's request for an additional $24 billion in Ukraine aid. So I presume this is, so Biden wanted $16 billion to backfill the US stocks. So actually it's less about Ukraine and more about the US, and $8 billion for, I think, USAI spending for Ukraine. Just in the last 6 weeks of Congress under the Biden administration. Mike Johnson said, I'm not even going to table that. I'm not even going to put that in front of people. It's not happening because I'm speaker and it's not happening. Rather like the 7 months of impasse because of Mike Johnson, he's doing it again. There you go. That is what you need to know about the incoming administration. We can argue about Keith Kellogg and we can argue about Donald Trump. Is he going to do this? Is he going to do that? This will be coming from Donald Trump. Ukraine, he said yesterday that Ukraine are going to get no more assistance. It's not on the horizon as it stands. And they're not going to get, or the US armed forces are not going to get 24 billion in the form of Ukraine aid. I'm not even going to entertain that motion. This is who they are. Although, again, you go and listen to someone like Keith Kellogg. So it wasn't Keith Kellogg, it was another general that was interviewed by Brian Kilmeade on Fox News Radio. And it was a really good interview. Brian Kilmeade's funny, like Fox and Friends, who are just pretty much hate everything they say all the time. But Brian Kilmeade is weird because I don't like him at all. But he's always been strong on defending Ukraine. So he's always tried to correct people who have made incorrect statements about Ukraine. And he's actually got his head switched on with regard to Ukraine. and he was interviewing a general who's involved with the Institute for the Study of War, and it was Kane. Um, uh, Really interesting, like 16-minute interview where you're like, yeah, this is the thinking. Why is this not front and center of the Republican Party? Why do we have Mike Johnson saying stuff like this? Why do we have Tucker Carlson being a mouthpiece, it appears, for like the populist end of the side of the party? Why do we just not have sensible people making sensible decisions? But every time I hear Keith Kellogg say something sensible, I'm like, yeah, actually, this is going to be all right. The Trump administration is going to actually do the right thing. Then I just hear Mike Johnson say something, or I hear someone else say something, and it is a bit of a hot mess. Now, going back to Antony Blinken, Ukraine will receive $50 billion from frozen Russian assets in the coming weeks, Blinken said at a briefing. According to him, there is a coordinated US-EU plan to quickly transfer the funds to Ukraine. That would be amazing. I mean, what you want, really, assuming that they're not going to be pushed to negotiation, Ukraine and Russia, within the first day, by the 20th, Trump lied. Trump lied to the electorate. I will get this sorted before I am inaugurated. Well, that's not going to happen. There isn't going to be peace before the 20th of January. I'm sorry, that is not going to happen as far as I can work out. Okay, might still happen, but as far as I can work out, he was lying, and he's not going to get it done in one day. Either before, I mean, he said one day, that's already gone. One day's been and gone. You won the election. 24 hours later, there wasn't peace. So that was a lie. Okay, let's give you 1 day from inauguration. That's not going to happen. I'm interested to know how long between the 20th of January and when they start the negotiations, force the negotiations, if that's what's going to happen, and how long those negotiations will last. So how long will war keep going on? Now, in this interview with Brian Kilmeade, what the chap said, and we'll go through it a little bit in the geopolitics video, but what he said was Trump needs to, and he's a Trumpite, etc., he's a Republican. He was saying we need to give some breathing space for Ukraine. So don't rush into it. As soon as January the 20th it comes, it shouldn't be day one, let's get this sorted. Give some breathing space because there are things happening. He was talking about the collapse of the Russian economy. So something like this is fascinating. $50 billion that Ukraine might suddenly get to go right, because there's been this idea that the problem for Ukraine isn't the capacity the potential capacity to build missiles and drones. The potential's there. What is missing is the money. And if suddenly they get $50 billion and they're being given assistance in, which I think they probably are, with designing, creating like the Neptune cruise missile or whatever missiles they're going to come up with, they just need the money. And then suddenly you might get this situation where there's a couple of months where Ukraine can build and build and build missiles and drones, and Russia gets hammered. Suddenly, those air bases are getting knackered. And if that's the case, you don't want to be forcing Ukraine to negotiations at that time. You want to see whether they can cripple the Russians from a distance. The Russians will have exhausted themselves on the front lines, I would have thought. I'm not sure that what they're doing at the moment can last an awful lot longer. Hopefully, if Ukraine can get their reserves into play and get them tooled up, which might again be about money. You've suddenly got $50 billion and you're thinking, right, we're going to build missiles, we're going to build drones, attack drones, really serious warhead drones. And we can suddenly equip these brigades that we're complaining have not been equipped at the moment. And then the front line looks a bit different. And then Russia is getting hammered in the rear. So you want to give them a bit of breathing space to be able to do that, to see if that is doable. It might not be. They might not have enough money or capacity or whatever. But let's see what they can do. So the Ukraine's foreign minister says as well that Ukraine may receive 20 air defense systems by the end of 2024. There's been this call with the energy infrastructure being hit, that huge wave of missiles recently. There have been calls for even more air defense systems, those Hawks that we talked about the other day, NASAMS, IRIS-T. Sabihar, the foreign minister, said that Ukraine urgently needs air defense systems like Hawk, NASAMS, and IRIS-T systems to prevent electricity blackouts that are caused by Russian constant strikes. But they could receive another 20. Well, I don't know from whom. I don't know the details of that, but great if that happens. Now, the Netherlands allocated 22 million euros for projects to develop air defense and cyber resilience, in Ukraine, according to the Dutch foreign minister. So he emphasized the importance of strengthening Ukraine's military capabilities and NATO's coordinated responses to the threat from Russia, which includes cybersecurity. So much going on at the moment, and loads to talk. My geopolitics video is going to be about 4 hours long at this rate. There is so much stuff going on. Right, Ukraine and the UK are to boost defence production through expanded military technical cooperation. Lieutenant General Ivan Havrilyuk, Ukraine's Deputy Defence Minister, highlighted this during talks with the UK government delegation. Key topics included joint projects and strengthening defence capabilities, so that's really good. Again, all this stuff that's looking good for Ukraine, you want this to come to fruition. Now, it could be that that's like a 1 or 2 year project going on there, but here's another example. Nammo, in the Finnish concern, has begun the construction of new ammunition, or Finnish Norway. I think they're owned by a complex set of concerns. Anyway, they've begun the construction, of a new ammunition production facility in Norway as part of an agreement with the Norwegian government worth 1 billion Norwegian kroner, so that's 93 million euros. Again, this is an ammunition factory being built there. You got a whole set of industrial concerns starting up in Lithuania, I think it is, or was it Estonia? You've got other factories ramping up all over the shop. And again, these need to come to fruition. Again, some breathing space for Ukraine to be able to use all of this. Bulgaria is sending weapons, equipment, and ammunition to Ukraine in its already 7th package of military assistance, according to the BNR national broadcaster. Yesterday, 2 days ago, they reported that. That's great. Bulgaria have been absolute saints when it comes to Ukraine's military assistance. They provided at one stage earlier on in the war, I think a third of the ammunition was coming from Bulgaria. They still produce a lot of Soviet-era ammunition, and that is vital for Ukraine, who's still, Ukraine are going through this period of phasing out their Soviet stuff, but it's not a case of they're rendering it obsolete and getting rid of it. It's just they're waiting till it all gets blown up and attrited, and we're seeing more and more Western equipment. Well, in that phase, there's still going to be a phenomenal amount of equipment that requires the use of 152 mil and other caliber ammunition that only certain places can provide. Now, the German opposition leader Friedrich Merz has announced a visit to Ukraine in the coming days, and Merz has called for the creation of a contact group from Germany, France, Poland and Britain to develop a joint European strategy, quote, to support Ukraine in order to end the war. Ukraine must be supported with all necessary diplomatic, financial, humanitarian and even military means so that it can exercise its right to self-defense and restore its territorial integrity. So this is your conservative leader from the CDU in Germany, who is likely going to replace Olaf Scholz when the elections take place, I think, in February. But he's a strong supporter of Ukraine, and that's really good news for Ukraine going forward. It's going to be interesting how that plays out. I'm not sure I agree with much of the rest of his politics, but certainly on Ukraine, he seems to be in the right place. Now, Shashank Joshi reporting from The Verge, which is a technological publication. OpenAI, that's one of the big artificial intelligence companies in the world, is partnering with Anduril, which is a military contractor. The two companies announced on Wednesday as part of the partnership, OpenAI will integrate its software into Anduril's counter-drone system. So Anduril makes drones and counter-drone systems. Interesting that they're getting a massive AI company on board with that. Terminator. Did I say that? Did I say Terminator? Ukrainian forces are testing a fiber optic hexacopter bomber for military use. The E-Banshee developed drone, immune to electronic warfare because one presumes it has that fiber optic cable, completed 10 kilometers of forest testing with zero connection lost. Next, combat trials. I mean, that's a big bit of kit, but if it can't be taken out by electronic warfare, that'll be super useful. And you hope to see that at night. These larger drones are generally better. They're more resilient to electronic warfare, probably because you can fit bigger counter drone bits of equipment on them because they can take a much greater load. But you'd much rather that load capacity get taken up with munitions and whatnot. And so it could be that following the Russians had some success with fiber optic cabling. It seems that is your better solution. Here we have, and we've seen these before, but as another example, Ukrainian 122mm Grad rocket launcher mounted on a Humvee M1152. So yeah, these kind of technicals we saw, actually they were something that we saw more in like Syria and other places that then the Ukrainians took some notes there, and we can see that they've got a much smaller multiple launch rocket system but are doing its stuff there. Okay, those that doubt the power of Russian disinformation, read this. So this is Georgescu, the person that won the first round of the Romanian presidential elections. He came from nowhere 2 months ago after a Russian TikTok campaign using 10 million fake accounts. He may now just win the Romanian presidential election, pull Romania out of NATO and join Russia's war against Ukraine. I'm hoping this won't happen. I don't think it will happen. It was a really crowded electoral competition there. It's a first round, so everyone goes in and then you take out the top two. You'll have an awful lot of people that voted for a whole range of candidates, and it turns out that the woman who's running against him, all of the other parties have coalesced in their support for her, as opposed to him. And lots of people are now realizing that they were duped by TikTok, or not by TikTok necessarily, by the disinformation that was on TikTok. So in an interview today, says Derek Tainus, the pro-Russian Călin Georgescu declared that if he wins, he will immediately cut off all Romanian military aid for Ukraine. Wow. Stop all Ukrainian grain exports through Romania. So that's to say, we don't want grain going to the world. We don't want people to be fed in the world. That food's not coming through here. And Bucharest will cease to comply with its NATO commitments. So he will pull Romania out of NATO, stop supporting Ukraine, and help starve the world. Well done. You sound like a really good bloke. Russian occupiers have escalated forced mobilization targeting young men in Luhansk. So not only are they now apparently drafting students, sort of forcing students out their cars and whatnot in Moscow to join up, but they are intensifying the forced mobilization in the occupied states as well. Amid intensified conscription efforts, civilians in the region endure freezing conditions with no heat or adequate supplies, as these young people are being purposefully targeted. Right, okay, that's enough from me. I really appreciate your support, and a big thanks to just a thanks to these people. So Julian Rossiter, as ever, Lada Gaga, Neil Sinclair, Michael Shiozaki, two someones, Rob Layton, Egon Fredrickson, Linda Reed, Hoagie, Stephen Bendal, Carl Rudd, Sam J, Pong, Will, Paul Spiker, thank you so much, Paul, very kind, Rand, Ivan Staub, someone, and Glenn Greaterex, thank you, Glenn, as ever. Also, KWG Matthews, thank you as well. So those people on Buy Me a Coffee who've been supporting the channel over the last few months, I really appreciate that. Thank you to all of the members as well, and please subscribe above. That would really help out the channel as I'm trying to reach this amazing target of 50,139. God, I don't want to add another 1,000. That would be impossible. 50,139 by the 2nd of January, because that will be super important to me. Anyway, take care. Speak soon.